The bloodiest war for Americans in history is the Civil War, with modern estimates of around 750,000 dead American citizens. This is important because 750,000 is a lot. So when you look at 5 important British novels and see that they combine to a total of 750,000 words, taking nearly 50 hours to read, it's pretty necessary if you're studying literature for Quizbowl like I am to get some summaries and basic understanding, which is why my name is Lodrin, you're a bunch of nerds, and I'm going to summarize for you the 5 most important classic British novels. In this video, I will attempt to, in under 20 minutes, give you a summary of 5 extremely long novels, that is Pride and Prejudice, Frankenstein, Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, and Great Expectations. These come up a ton in Quizbowl, and if you've never watched one of these literature videos before, I will give a quick summary of each novel and then talk about clues that often pop up regarding this novel in the Quizbowl canon. So without further ado, I got to get right into Pride and Prejudice, which is a very, very complex novel. Now, I won't be able to give you a full understanding of this novel in just the short time I have, because I personally have still not finished this novel. It's a really good book, but it's pretty boring, and it's taken me quite a while to get all the way through. And every time I read a summary in order to get better for Quizbowl, I always forget it, because it's just such a complex novel with so much happening. So I'm going to attempt to make it easier by breaking it up into 5 key sections. The first we will call the first 2 men. That is, these 2 men are Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley. So the novel opens by discussing the Bennet family. Miss Bennet believes that all 5 of her daughters need to get married as quickly as possible. They live at the Longbourn estate. Now, nearby there's a different estate, a bigger, more rich estate called the Netherfield Park. And into Netherfield Park moves Mr. Bingley. And he brings with him a party of people, including his friend, Mr. Darcy. Now, at a party at Netherfield Park, Mr. Bingley falls in love with Jane and they start dancing. But Mr. Darcy refuses to dance with Elizabeth Bennet, the second oldest of the Bennet sisters, because he believes she is not handsome enough. This is important because this kicks off the idea of prejudice in this novel, because right away Elizabeth Bennet is given reason to dislike Mr. Darcy. Now the next part of the novel I'm going to call the next 2 men, because now Mr. Collins and George Wickham show up. Mr. Collins is a friend of the Bennet family, and he believes that he wants to marry one of the Bennets. So he basically comes, he falls in love with Elizabeth Bennet, and tries to propose to her. But Elizabeth Bennet is pretty jaded towards guys in general, and she says no. It's important to note that Mr. Collins is here in support of his patroness, whose name is Lady Catherine de Bourgh. She kind of acts as the antagonist, the pseudo-antagonist of this novel, because she drives a lot of the plot in a negative direction. Also at this time, George Wickham shows up. George Wickham is a militia officer, and he tells Elizabeth in private, where no one can hear him, that Mr. Darcy did some bad things to him in the past. And Elizabeth, because she already dislikes Mr. Darcy, instantly believes him with very little evidence. So at this point, Elizabeth really dislikes Mr. Darcy, and Jane and Mr. Bingley are falling in love. But Mr. Bingley leaves at the encouragement of Mr. Darcy, breaking Jane's heart. Elizabeth obviously dislikes him and also leaves Longbourn Estate to go live with her aunt and uncle Gardiner in London. Now, the next part of this novel we are going to call the confrontation. Basically, this is when Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy come to head, because when Elizabeth goes away, she actually visits Mr. Collins, who she earlier rejected the marriage of, and his now wife, Charlotte Lucas, a friend of hers. But they just happen to live very close to where Mr. Darcy is staying. And so they visit Lady Catherine's home, who Catherine is also Mr. Darcy's aunt. So they visit her home and find Mr. Darcy. So now Elizabeth has a direct reason to dislike Mr. Darcy even more. But at this point, Mr. Darcy actually likes Elizabeth, and as such, he actually proposes to Elizabeth. But when she is given further proof that he was the one that drove Mr. Bingley away from Jane, she's like, no, because of course she still really dislikes Mr. Darcy. So as they go on from here, Mr. Darcy begins to try to make it up to Elizabeth. As they're in such close proximity, he's talking to her more, and he sends her a letter. In this letter, he explains that George Wickham actually did some wrong against him, and that in the end of the day, Mr. Darcy was innocent of any wrongdoing in that situation. He also reveals that he separated Jane and Bingley because he didn't think the match was good. And while he's not justifying his actions, it shows to Elizabeth that he wasn't a cold, heartless person. And so at this point, Elizabeth's like, shoot, did I mess up? And she's really ashamed of what she did, and she's realizes that some of her prejudice may have been not founded, and she shouldn't have disliked Mr. Darcy as much as she did. So the fourth part of the novel is redemption, as this is where Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy finally make up. Elizabeth is with her uncle and aunt Gardiner. She is visiting Derbyshire. They decide to go to Pemberley, which is Mr. Darcy's estate. They see how amazing it is, and Elizabeth further realizes that she really never should have disliked this person in the first place. But once they're there, she sees that Mr. Darcy is now completely better. He's no longer this mean person that she saw him as in the beginning. In fact, he even helps Lydia and Wickham. Lydia is one of the younger Bennet sisters, to finally get married, because George Wickham was not being very nice to Lydia, refusing to get married, and Mr. Darcy helps make sure it happens. And at this time, getting married as a woman was the only way you could ensure that you would be safe growing up. So now that Elizabeth finally sees that Mr. Darcy is being this good person, she writes back to her aunt, trying to figure out more, and Elizabeth is further shown just how good Mr. Darcy can be. So then we go to part 5 of the novel, the conclusion, where Mr. Bingley finally accepts Jane's marriage offer. Well, technically Jane accepts Mr. Bingley's, but Mr. Bingley returns to Longbourn, and they're getting married. And then Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy finally agree to get married. But Lady Catherine, she doesn't like this. She wants Mr. Darcy to get married to her daughter, and tries to break up the marriage between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it fails, and Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth fully make up, get married, and the novel ends on a very happy note, because Elizabeth has gotten over her prejudice about Mr. Darcy in the beginning, and they have gotten married. So that was my attempt at a very quick summary of this novel. Obviously, it still took 5 minutes. This novel is extremely complex. Now I'm just going to go over a couple of the most common things you will see about this in Academic Challenge. Alright, so here we see the most common clues about this, and I will show you a couple things real quick about it. One of the most common clues that will come up will just be the various different estates. You'll see Netherfield will pop up a lot. You'll see Longbourn. You'll see Pemberley. There's Pemberley. You'll see these estates pop up a lot. Learning these 3 main estates is really important. Remember, Longbourn's the Bennets, Netherfield is where Mr. Bingley moves in, and Pemberley is Mr. Darcy himself. Knowing all the characters is important. If you need to know the sisters, it's the oldest is Jane, who marries Mr. Bingley. Then it's Elizabeth, who's the main character, marries Mr. Darcy. Then it's Mary. We don't hear much from her. She's quiet. There's Catherine, also known as Kitty. She's a bit of a wild card. And then there's Lydia, who elopes and runs away with George Wickham. Other important people to note, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Just look how much she comes up. If you look, nearly every single question about Pride and Prejudice includes Lady Catherine, often in power. She is the biggest giveaway clue that has gotten me buzzes on Pride and Prejudice in the past. If you need to know, Jane Austen wrote this. It was her second novel. That'll come up. One final thing that I've seen quite a few times is there's a parody version of this novel that's called Pride and Prejudice, something about zombies, I believe. Yeah, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies is the name. This pops up quite a lot. As you'll see, it will talk about parody of the novel involving not zombies, and that would be the parody of Pride and Prejudice. A couple other final notes about this extremely important. This is the most important British novel. You'll see it pop up more than anything else. It's not often the answer, but it will help you get to the answer. Sometimes the characters themselves can be the answers. It's extremely important to note that the 5 sisters will pop up. You have to know all their names. They will often pop up in bonuses, such as this one right here. You'll see Jane Bennet here. And this one here, you'll see Fitzwilliam Darcy. That's just Mr. Darcy. His name is Fitzwilliam Darcy. You have to know the characters well. This is the most important British novel. Learn it inside and out. You really should read it. I need to finish reading it myself. And that was my attempt at quickly explaining Pride and Prejudice. I had to take a quick break after that behemoth of a novel, but I'm going to go through Frankenstein next, which will be much, much quicker. This novel is by Mary Shelley, was written in 1818, and is one of the first examples of a true Gothic novel. Now, the first important note that I need you to know, most people know Frankenstein himself. However, always remember when you're answering an academic challenge question, Frankenstein is different than Frankenstein's monster. Frankenstein is the narrator of the book. He's a mad scientist. He's quite a terrible person. And then Frankenstein's monster is the character we often call Frankenstein. But you will be marked wrong in Quizbowl if you say the wrong one. So just if it's like this character, always make sure you either say Frankenstein's monster when you're talking about the creature, or Frankenstein if you're talking about the person. So real quick, here's the summary. Victor Frankenstein's a mad scientist. He creates this creature, and this creature, Frankenstein's monster, runs away to the wild. He lives in a little side shack of a house for a while, observes the family. He learns to speak, read, and write by hearing them do that. He finds Paradise Lost, he reads it, but eventually he reveals himself to the family, but they revile him and send him away. He tries to save a girl from drowning. He gets shot by the girl's father because he thought he was trying to attack the girl. Basically, he realizes that humanity is kind of rough and decides to go back and get some revenge. So he goes back to Geneva, where Victor Frankenstein lives, kills Frankenstein's little brother, who this is blamed on Justine, and Justine's like a servant, and Victor knows it was his monster, but he lets Justine take the blame and get executed. Coming back to Victor Frankenstein, the monster asks him for a female companion, which Frankenstein obliges to because he doesn't want to die. But before he was done with creating the monster, he kills it. He kills the monster. So in response, Frankenstein strangles Henry Clerval, a friend of Victor Frankenstein, and promises to be with Frankenstein on his wedding night. Frankenstein's obviously scared of this, but eventually he decides to get married to a girl named Elizabeth Lavenza. But during the wedding night, Frankenstein's monster comes in, kills Elizabeth, and makes good on his promise to be there. So Victor vows revenge, tries to chase him to the Arctic, succeeds in chasing him to the Arctic, but then eventually he dies on board a ship. Frankenstein's monster comes back aboard the ship, tells the captain, Robert Walton, that he will kill himself, and the novel ends, and we only assume that he does. So it's a real tragedy of a novel. Most of the characters in it die, and at the end we're left with dead Frankenstein and dead Frankenstein's monster. But anyway, the most common clues you will see about this will be, well, the power clues will be all over the place. There's a lot of different stuff that you can do in this novel because he travels around the country so much, and he travels around Europe and even goes down to the Arctic, or I think up to the Arctic. So there's a lot with that will be in power, but the most common clues that I get Frankenstein off as somebody who has not actually read it are clues like Henry Clerval, clues like Justine getting blamed for the murder of Victor Frankenstein's little brother. Other common clues, as you see, I've had this open the whole time. Common clues here include, let's look. Henry Clerval, so you'll see him come up at the end often. You will see Justine come up in power a lot. So if you know Justine Moritz, you'll be able to get it in power from that usually. Other big things, Paradise Lost is obviously super big here. Yeah, look, 13 hits on Paradise Lost. Paradise will come up a ton when talking about Frankenstein, because that's kind of how he learns to read and write. And that is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Very dark novel. It comes up a good bit in Academic Challenge, but it's really hard to learn without reading. Honestly, all these British novels are, just because of how freaking long they are. The next novel we're going to go through is the 1847 work Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. It's a really important novel, also is really long, but I can give an easy, really concise summary of this one by going through the 5 places where Jane stays throughout the novel. So basically, she starts off in a place called Gateshead Hall, which is where she grows up with her aunt and uncle because her parents are dead. But she's not treated very well. She's not allowed to play with her cousins. Mrs. Reed is her aunt, but is really cruel to her, puts her in the Red Room as punishment, which she messes up. And basically, the only person that's ever kind to her is a servant named Bessie. Eventually, her aunt sends her away to Lowood School, which is like a boarding school that's really meant as a punishment for young girls. Because at there, Mr. Brocklehurst is a really cruel headmaster. Her friend Helen dies of typhus, so it makes the school even worse for her. And things really don't get better until near the end at her school. Things are starting to improve, but she really can't stay, so she goes away and eventually gets a job working at a place called Thornfield Hall, which is led by Mr. Rochester. But as she begins to work there, she gets really close to Mr. Rochester, gets jealous when he starts seeing a different girl, and just really wants to marry him. She realizes she's fallen in love. But before they can get married, or they do try to get married, but they're not allowed to get married because turns out Mr. Rochester is already married. He claims he was forced into it. He had no choice because of his parents, but he's married to a woman named Bertha Mason who stays up in his attic and just always causes trouble. Hurt by this, Jane flees. She leaves and realizes that she basically loses all her trust in the man that she loved. She ends up at a place called Morehouse. A clergyman, St. John Rivers, takes her in. They become really close. They become like siblings in many ways. But St. John Rivers actually asks her to marry and go with him as a missionary to India because he's a clergyman. She says yes to going to India, but refuses the marriage. But eventually she also refuses to go to India because she realizes she still cares for Mr. Rochester and wants to reunite with him. So then the final part of the novel takes place around this place called Ferndene because Thornfield Hall, where Mr. Rochester lived, actually burned down because Bertha Mason, his crazy ex-wife, or technically his crazy wife at the time, set it all on fire because she was trapped there and jumped off the roof and died. So he's basically burned his arm beyond repair. He has nothing left, and he's really humbled and realizes he has to apologize. And at this point, Jane Eyre does agree to marry him again. And at the end of the day, even though Rochester's partly blinded, it is still a happy ending because Jane Eyre and Jane Eyre and Mr. Rochester do finally get married. It's a very strange novel. You'll see a lot of clues about it. A lot of the time, the clues won't actually be about the novel, to be about Jane Eyre and other things, because she is an extremely important literary character, has done a lot. A big key from this is if you're not reading the work, you're not going to be able to power Jane Eyre, but you can get a lot, if you see at the end here, stuff on like St. John Rivers. Oh, sorry. You can get stuff on like St. John Rivers, like Mr. Rochester. These will all pop up near the end of the clue. You'll see the places popping up pretty soon. Like if you memorize the 5 places, look, Gateshead Hall, 4 mentions. Lowood School, 23 mentions. Ferndene, only 1 mention, but it was in Power. What are the other ones? Thornfield. Thornfield's got 28 mentions. And then Morehouse. Morehouse doesn't pop up. But you see that learning some of these institutions is really important because they pop up quite frequently. Jane Eyre is very much one that's really good for bonuses. It's going to be really hard to get them in Power unless you're really actually reading the novel. And you'll see clues like this, that it's like this novel's title character is held for ransom in a different work. And it's like, oh, well, that's difficult because unless you want to read 5 different works, it's going to be hard to power these Jane Eyre clues. But with just understanding the basics of that plot, knowing that Bertha Mason was in the attic, eventually burns down Thornfield Hall, you should be able to get most of these clues on the last or second to last line at least. The next novel up on my list of 5 classic novels is Wuthering Heights in 1847, just like Jane Eyre, novel by Charlotte Bronte, the author of Jane Eyre's sister, Emily Bronte. And this novel is another really difficult one. Of course, it's an old British novel. So for this one, I've pulled up right here. You can see I have a family tree. And I'm just going to basically explain the novel purely based off explaining each character and what they are. Real quick, in the opening, this man named Lockwood comes to see his landlord, Heathcliff, at Wuthering Heights, the titular building. And he's told this tale by Nellie, who is a servant there, of how all this came to be. So Mrs. and Mr. Earnshaw right here, they owned Wuthering Heights. They had Hindley and Catherine were their kids. Heathcliff was an orphan. He comes to them. They take him in and accept him. But they end up largely neglecting Hindley and Catherine and only give Heathcliff the attention. So Hindley gets really mad at Heathcliff, starts beating him, and once Mr. Earnshaw dies and he takes control of Wuthering Heights, he is continuously cruel to Heathcliff. Next door at Thrushcross Grange, Mrs. Linton and Mr. Linton have their kids, Edgar and Isabella. Edgar basically falls in love with Catherine, and even though Catherine and Heathcliff have been in love for a really long time, it's pretty clear because of how much Hindley and his wife, Frances, how much they despise and just torture and abuse Heathcliff. It's clear that Catherine really can't marry him, so she marries Edgar. And she still loves Heathcliff, but Heathcliff overhears a conversation and thinks it's Catherine saying how much she doesn't actually love him. And he gets mad, leaves the whole city in general, and vows revenge. So we flash forward a while. Catherine and Edgar have had Kathleen Linton. Kathleen Linton's like a baby. Hareton Earnshaw's also a baby. And Heathcliff comes back. Now he purposely courts Isabella Linton to get back at Catherine Earnshaw, because obviously that's her sister-in-law. So Heathcliff and Isabella often quickly get married. They have Linton Heathcliff as their kid. And as one last act of revenge, Heathcliff attempts to get Cathy and Linton to fall in love in order to steal Edgar's inheritance, basically, because he still hates Edgar Linton. But while Cathy's sick and on her deathbed, Heathcliff visits her, realizes that they did love each other the whole time, and swears that her ghost will never leave him. And turns out it doesn't, because he actually lets it possess him. So this book takes a supernatural twist, and Heathcliff, while possessed, basically just goes on a rampage, destroys things, and we hear at the end of the novel that after Lockwood came back 8 months later, Heathcliff finally dies, and he visits their graves, sees that Catherine, Edgar, and Heathcliff, Edgar and Heathcliff both loved Catherine, sees that they are finally at peace. And in the end, Lyndon Heathcliff dies, and then Cathy and Harrington Earnshaw end up married and own Wuthering Heights. So it's a very strange novel with a lot of weird things. There's a supernatural element in there. But if you understand this family tree and you know each and every character, who they're related to, who they're married to, you'll be able to get a lot of clues just based off that. Also, on the novel itself, you just have to learn. If you learn some of these more vague characters, such as, where are they? If you learn people like Mr. Lockwood or Joseph or Dr. Kenneth or Zilla, they often appear early on in the clues for them. A couple other things that will pop up quite a lot would be things like, go to QB Reader, Thrushcross Grange, which is where they live. You'll see Linton's is here, just out of power. If we go to the next one, you'll see things about Zilla, who I mentioned, the servant Joseph. So you'll see, unless you're planning on reading the novel, your best bet is to get it just out of power based off character names. You'll see some things like this one, where see how it mentions Isabella this early and Edgar this early. In easier novice sets or even other high school sets, you will be able to get powers just based off characters. I have powered Wuthering Heights before, even though I've never read a single word of the novel. It's a difficult one, like the other British novels, but it's definitely possible to get powers on. But now we have to move on to, in my opinion, the second hardest British novel, probably the second hardest novel, probably third hardest. After Pride and Prejudice and Les Mis, this is probably the third hardest novel to learn for how much it comes up, and that is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. This, right here, is the Wikipedia novel for Great Expectations. And while I've read pretty much this whole article, it gives a great description of most of the characters. Obviously, you don't necessarily want to take half an hour to read this, so I'm just going to describe, to get an understanding of this novel, the 6 main characters that are important for Quizbowl, and just kind of tell you how they progress through the story. Because this was serially released, like most of Dickens' novels, many of the stories have little to do with each other, so there's not necessarily one overarching plot, but I'm going to talk about these 6 main characters. First, there's Pip. He is the main character of the novel. He starts off living with his sister and brother-in-law because his parents are dead, just like all of Charles Dickens' characters, and eventually he becomes a blacksmith, or at least he pursues that trade, and falls in love with a girl named Estella. Pip in the novel is largely a kind person. He sees the best in people, and even when Estella constantly tells him they cannot be together, he pursues it, and in the end they do end up together, which we should probably talk about Estella. Estella is a girl who was told by her adopted mother, Miss Havisham, that she simply should not love men. She's taught to spurn them. She's taught to twist them around in her lies, and this is something she has to get over. And eventually she does marry, and her husband dies, and she is so hurt by this that she apologizes to Pip, and they do end up together at the end. Joe Gargery is Pip's brother-in-law, who is really the father figure and main leader in his life. He teaches him how to do blacksmith stuff. Joe's a kind-hearted person who helps him, and in the end of the day, Joe serves as an early example of good for Pip. Abel Magwitch is a convict. He escapes from a prison in Australia. He's constantly beefing with this guy named Compeyson, who is another escaped convict, and he eventually has to go to court to try to escape all of his criminal activities. One key instance in the novel is when Pip, early on, helps out Magwitch when he was on the run. He helps out the convict, gives him meat and pie, and is really kind to the man. So once Magwitch gets some money under the pseudonym Provis, he becomes the benefactor of Pip, even though Pip believes his benefactor is Miss Havisham, because he doesn't know anyone else who has money, because he doesn't realize it is the escaped convict Magwitch. Miss Havisham is Estella's adopted mother. She has Pip visit her a bunch. She's extremely manipulative, though she eventually does apologize to Pip, and she dies before the end of the novel. Her dress catches on fire and she's badly burned, and then we later hear she died out of frame of the book. Like, we don't actually see her die in the book, but it's clear she died. And then the final important character is Mr. Jagger. He is a lawyer who basically defends a lot of people. He defends Abel Magwitch, tries to get him out of trouble. He really serves as the impetus between connecting a lot of the disconnected events in this novel, because there's just so much that happens that it's really hard to keep it all straight. And Charles Dickens attempts to use Mr. Jagger's representing various people as the connection between them. So if you see some of the stuff that will come up a lot, you'll see characters, you'll see Mr. Jaggers, you'll see Provis here. That was, remember, the fake name of Magwitch. Here's Compeyson. That's the person who Magwitch fights with a lot. You'll see other stuff here. You'll see just a lot of random stuff from throughout the novel. This is when I think it's very, very difficult, because there's just so much that happens in this novel that you really can't learn it all unless you read it and memorize it. One important instance is Pip actually goes to Cairo in Egypt for a while, so you'll see stuff about Egypt and Cairo having pop up a lot. Here's Miss Havisham. She's obviously super important. You'll see, as long as you know Pip, that will at least come up in the last line. Learn the characters to this novel. Learn some specific stuff. The protagonist is beaten by a cane called a tickler. Basically, his sister was really cruel to the family. She beat Joe Gargery and she beat Pip. That's an important note that you'll see come up sometimes. Just in general, a wedding dress here is important because I believe that's Miss Havisham wears her wedding dress even past the time she should. Just learning specific instances from this novel should give you enough of an understanding. If you've read a lot of Dickens, you'll actually begin to gain an understanding of him. You'll see a lot of similar notes about him, and early on in questions about him, you should be able to quickly identify that it is a Charles Dickens novel. So from there, it will just come down to figuring out, oh, is it Great Expectations? Is it David Copperfield? Is it Tale of Two Cities? And that will make things a lot easier for you. I really suggest reading this one as well. Honestly, all 5 novels in this are really important Quizbowl ones. They're extremely long novels, as I mentioned earlier, nearly 50 hours to read them all. But they're definitely worth it in terms of investment because of just how much they will come up in the Quizbowl canon. My next video will be on 5 more British novels, but they're much more fun. As a quick spoiler, Middlemarch, To the Lighthouse, Brave New World, 1984, and Lord of the Flies. These are much more exciting novels with more interesting plots. They aren't just all orphans and love stories. If you've somehow made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. I know this was boring. These 5 novels have given me so much trouble. You really do need to read them. But I've been rambling long enough. I will see you guys next time.